G'day, I'm Warwick Schiller and I want to talk to you a little bit today about an article I saw online recently. And the article was called, I think it said, Freak Horse Riding Accident Not Likely. And I thought, hey, I like the sound of that because I personally believe most accidents are completely avoidable. And I went on to read the article, and what the article was actually trying to say was horse riding accidents aren't freak accidents, they're going to happen. They just happen out of nowhere. I'll read you a bit from the article. It was talking about unfortunately several riders who have died recently, and it said these riders had another thing in common. I forget what the first thing in common was, but these riders had another thing in common. News reports used the term freak accident in the headline. Do these reporters live in a shoebox? There's nothing freak about a riding accident. Emergency rooms treat about 15,000 equine-related head injuries a year, and that doesn't count other broken bones. Sometimes when I get particularly irked by a phrase, I'll look it up to see if I'm being a stickler. The Urban Dictionary defines freak accident as one that's extremely unlikely and unusual. And their most popular example is, Fabio was involved in a freak accident. He got hit in the face by a duck while riding a roller coaster. That there would be a freak accident, wouldn't it? We can all agree Fabio had a freak accident. He was hit in the head by a duck while riding a roller coaster. Freak accident. Could be, unless there was a sign at the entrance to the roller coaster that said this roller coaster is located next to a marsh and it happens to be migrating season. There's lots of ducks flying and landing right now, and there's a possibility while you're riding this roller coaster you may encounter a duck at high speed. Then it wouldn't be a freak accident. It would be, okay, you kind of took the risk, you read the sign and you said, yeah, I'd take the risk anyway. Does that make sense there? And the reason I mention that is because horses give you signs. Horses give you those signs are written all over the place. They're written all over your horse, in his eye, in his posture. They're written everywhere. So this horse here is Bundy. And I got him out this morning because I'm going to do some filming today for my TV show called The Principles of Training. And this morning it was freezing cold here for California. It was 27 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about -4 Celsius. And he hasn't been ridden for about a week. Anyway, normally Bundy's pretty cool about everything. I mean, you've seen him in like the video on how to teach a horse to get good with gunfire, and you see me cracking whips on him and all sorts of stuff. You know, if you take him to horse expos, he's pretty casual. Normally I just get out and jump on him. Well, this morning, he's covered in mud. He lives out in that pasture over there, and it's pretty darn muddy out there. So this morning I thought, well, I need to wash him, so it's bloody cold. So I got the hot water heater out. So I tied him up here, went inside the barn, and come tootling around out that doorway and over here with this hot water heater. And it rattles and shakes and carries on. And it kind of spooked him, and he pulled back, and when he hit the end of the rope, he jumped forward. Oh, it's over, it's all good now. But he just gave me a sign. He said, I am not the Bundy you got off last time you got off me. You may need to go back and revisit some of that stuff before you ride me today. And imagine with him it'll take me about 5 minutes. But I can't remember the last time he had a response like that to pretty much anything, okay? But there's some things going on here this morning. It being cold, hasn't been ridden, whatever. Does that make sense? And so there's a really good book by a fellow named, my cat's down here playing within the lead rope, I don't know if you can see her. There's a really good book by a fellow named Malcolm Gladwell called Outliers. And in that book, Outliers, he's trying to figure out why successful people are successful. You know, at the start of the book, there's a dictionary definition of an outlier, and it's something like something from a statistical group that stands far apart from that statistical group. Basically, if you grew up in the same neighborhood with the same socioeconomic status, went to the same school, why did you become a millionaire and your friend, he worked at McDonald's or something or other? Okay, that's what he's looking at in the book. And so he looks at lots of different things, and he looks at some pretty obtuse stuff. But one of the things he looks at is catastrophic plane crashes that shouldn't have happened. And that's not like the Russians shot a plane down, or that pilot crashed, suicide into the Alps in France or Switzerland, wherever it was. This is a perfectly good plane, crashes and kills 300 people, okay? They've investigated those things, and they have not found one of those that ever happened that didn't involve 7 consecutive mistakes. Okay, the guy loading the fuel didn't load quite enough fuel, the pilot made a mistake, then the co-pilot made a mistake, and then the pilot made a mistake, and then the co-pilot made a mistake, and then the tower made a mistake, and then. Okay? but there's never been one with less than 7, which I travel a lot, I fly a lot, which means I could have been on a plane where there's been 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 mistakes made, but I'm still here to tell the story because the 7 didn't happen. And so I posted this on my Facebook group, and there was a lot of discussion about it, what I just talked about with the freak accidents. And I was trying to say there's no such thing as freak accidents. And someone said, oh yeah, it's the Swiss cheese theory. Okay, Swiss cheese is all full of holes. And if you get slices of Swiss cheese, you stack one on, the holes don't line up. But if you got all the holes to line up, that's when things would go wrong. Another one was that someone recommended a book called The Atomic Accident, or The Atomic something or other, but it was about nuclear power stations are perfectly safe. It takes, I think they've investigated, nuclear breakdowns, catastrophic things at nuclear plants, 5 mistakes in a row. This valve didn't work, this guy forgot to check this, that guy didn't do that. That's why we have safety, safety checks and things like that. So what I'm getting at here is, I said before, there are signs. Your horse gives you signs all the time. If you can learn to read the signs, I mean, I've been training horses for 25 years. Bucking, rearing, bolting. What's that crazy cat doing? Bucking, rearing, bolting. Then my cameraman's laughing. I knew something was going on. Horses that were dangerous and did freak accident-y stuff before I got them. I didn't have any freak accidents on them because I went back to the start first, but I'm also very, very aware of reading the signs, okay? There's a lot of things I won't do with a horse, because it's one mistake. One of them would be, I'm never going to put my knee in front of a horse's head for really any reason, okay? Now, a lot of people do it and they don't get hurt, but raise your hand if you've ever been kneed in the face by a horse's knee. Some of you may have had it happen, okay? A lot of you go, I do it all the time and it hasn't happened. Well, you haven't had the Swiss cheeses all line up. You haven't had 7 consecutive mistakes. So think about this morning, okay? 7 consecutive things happen. Now think about this morning. It's 27 degrees, it's cold. He hasn't been ridden for a week, that's 2. I kneel down and put my head in front of his knee, that's 3, but still nothing happens. But then someone wheels that thing around the corner, 4, boom. I can have a head injury, can't I? But think about this, if I don't ever stick my head in front of his knee, you can have all the 27 degrees and all the not being ridden for weeks and all the rattly things come around the corner. I'm not going to have an accident because I didn't do the one thing that's going to cause that. I mean, and you've just got to learn to read the signs. Things like, as I said before, I travel a lot, do clinics all around the world, and if I'm having a candid conversation with someone who's had an accident, not someone who doesn't want to investigate why it happened, which a lot of people are like that. You can't ask questions about. And what's funny about horse riding accidents? Someone dies in a horse riding accident, and that's tragic. I completely understand that. But someone dies in a horse riding accident. You can't say, well, what happened leading up to that? Did they do a good job of this? Did they do a good job of that? Because you're going to get ostracized for that. I have been, okay? But I guarantee you, someone dies from an assault. The police will ask questions, they will knock on doors, they will talk to neighbours, they will talk to witnesses, okay? They will interview the guy, they'll ask him lots of hard questions. They can play good cop, bad cop. If a person dies in a car accident, okay, they're going to take blood tests. They're going to do a blood alcohol content, they're going to do a drug screening, they're going to check the skid marks, they're going to look at this and look at that and figure out exactly what went wrong. And I think it's a shame that we're not allowed to talk about what happened when someone died. It's just a freak accident. Because if you think about it, someone may have been culpable, okay? And we're not trying to blame the poor person who's no longer here or in a wheelchair or whatever. What I'm trying to do is get some serious data to show, to get other people so it doesn't actually happen. Does that make sense there? So, all around the world I do clinics and I talk to a lot of people, like I said, have candid conversations about their freak accidents they've had. And looking back, there's like, oh yeah, the signs were there, I just didn't read the signs. Okay, just like Bundy this morning. I don't think anything's going to happen, but I am going to make sure I just go back and do some stuff before I ride him, because I'm careful that way. What was I going to say about that? Oh, I was in Australia one time at a horse expo, big horse expo called Equitana, and I was standing talking to a guy. I was in a barn aisle, so the aisle was about this wide, from this fence here to about there, and there was a horse tied there, not my horse, not this other guy's horse. The other guy's name was Bill. And we were standing off to the side of it, like about here, having a conversation. Now Bill is an old rodeo guy. He's an excellent horseman. He's a stunt man, worked on the Man from Snow River. Doesn't get hurt, but does all sorts of crazy stuff, but doesn't get hurt. He's a bit of a tough guy. He's kind of like a Lee Marvin sort of a guy. Anyway, I was standing there talking to Bill, and while we're talking, someone came walking along, and they looked over and they were being polite. They didn't want to interrupt our conversation, so they just ducked under the neck of the tied up horse right there. And as they did that, our conversation stopped. We both stopped talking at the same time. We looked at that guy walking away, looked at each other, and I said to Bill, would you do that? And he goes, no. Now think about this. Bill's a tough guy. He's not scared of anything. But he wouldn't do that, because that's one mistake, okay? Because if a horse pulls back, what's the thing they do very next? They shoot forward, okay? I don't really duck under the neck of any horse. If it was tied up, if it wasn't tied up, I might, because if they jump back, they're going to stay back. But ducking under the neck of a strange horse, you know, I wouldn't do it. But you probably see a lot of people at wherever you keep your horse do it, and you think, oh, it's not a big deal. I guarantee you Bill the tough guy doesn't do it. I won't do it, okay, because it's one mistake. It's just got to have a couple of things add up, just like me putting my head in front of his knee. Does that make sense there? You know, like I said about asking people about their accidents around the world, and you know, I'll say, well, how was your horse that day? Oh, he was fine. So he stood perfectly still on a loose rein when you got on. Oh no, Dad always has to hang on him when I get on because he wants to move. I'm like, okay, this has been coming for a long time then. You know, if you need someone to hold your horse when you get on, there's one, okay? There's a build-up of anxiety in that horse, okay? If your horse walks off when you're getting on, there's two. There's, you know, all those things. They're all little things. And think about, I mean, some of you guys watching this, think about where you ride your horses, okay? And the people that you see, and I can guarantee any one of you can think of 50 of them right now that you've seen, that someone having to hold the horse when they get on, okay? Many times they're in English disciplines, not always, but many times they are. And those are the people that when they have an accident say, oh, just out of nowhere, he had this problem. I tell you what, if you've all guys have watched my YouTube channel for quite a while, back in the early days, I had some videos of a warm blood stallion I was starting, okay? First day he was pretty wild, but he ended up being pretty good. If you haven't seen it, just Google warm blood stallion, because that's in the title. Not Google, YouTube, warm blood stallion, that's in the title. But anyway, I started him and a number of his brothers and sisters. They're all by the same stallion. He's an Olympic jumping horse. And I have never had a group of siblings, because I've trained a lot of horses that were related by the same sire or out of the same mare or whatever. I've never had a group of siblings be so weird about the saddle. Okay, and I do a long saddling process. It's not like I just throw the saddle on and they're weird about it. There's a big old process that goes into that. So I don't rush it and skip things. And every once in a while, I've got a young horse here now that's really weird about the saddle, okay? But I've asked people who have brothers and sisters of his, nah, it's just a one-off thing. Whereas every one of these horses was weird about the saddle. They almost couldn't think with two eyes. Like, once you get them saddled, and you were over here, and then they go, oh, there's a stirrup, and they'd fart and buck, and then, oh, and it took a long time to get them good with the saddle. I'm talking doing the groundwork every day for a month. But then here you go, if you watch the video of that black warm blood stallion, so I think one's called Teaching a Horse to Steer, and it's riding him in the round pen, and it's his second ride or something or other. He rides around just casual, it's easy. He's quite relaxed. Then you see the first ride outside, so I ride him in a 100 by 300 foot, which is 50 by 100 meter arena, 150 by 300, sorry. And he just cruises around and it's like, oh, he's a nice quiet horse. No, he's not a nice quiet horse. He was telling me all the signs that I need to get rid of all this saddle stuff before I start riding him or I'm going to have problems. Anyway, so he came good and so did all the rest of them because I spent the time reading the signs. I'm not good with this saddle. I'm not perfectly good with this saddle. So I got talking to a jumping trainer who also had some horses by that same stallion. And she said, oh, I said, they're a bit weird. And she goes, oh yeah, I had this one and he could jump 1.30 m, fine. Okay, but once you jumped over 1.30 m, he lost his mind. He would actually like duck off and run. He ran through a crowd one time, ran through a fence and ran through a crowd. He just out of nowhere he did that. And I said, and I asked her a question which she looked at me strangely, because it seemed to have nothing to do with the whole conversation, I said to her, so how was he to saddle? And she said, ah, he's fine. And I said, so you could be in the barn, take your lead rope, throw it on the ground, walk into the tack room, come back out and throw the saddle on him? She goes, oh, no, you had to have 2 grooms hold him while you saddled him. Bingo, right there. There's a sign that says there may be flying ducks on this ride and you may get hit in the face right at your own risk. Does that make sense there? Now, I'm not saying I expect everybody to know the signs. This is not about that. I mean, I'd like you to educate yourself about the signs. What this whole thing is about is just blanket covering, just because you don't know the signs, telling everybody else that horses are completely unpredictable and things just happen out of nowhere and nothing happened. You know, there's an old saying, I think it's a Ray Hunt saying, could be a Buck Brenneman saying, what happened before what happened happened? Because I'm observing everything. I observe how I catch them. Okay, when I lead them from where I caught them to where I'm going to saddle them. How are they along the way? Are they relaxed? Are they responsive? Are they ignorant? Are they belligerent? Are they worried? Are they... And any time it goes away from pretty much perfect, I'm going to fix that thing right there till we're back to perfect and keep going on from there. So does that make sense? So I hope that just gives you something to think about. Oh, by the way too, somebody watching this is probably going to want to try to turn it into a helmet debate. This is not a helmet debate. Wear a helmet. That's fine. Wear a helmet. But don't wear a helmet and ignore the signs. Okay? Because the signs are what causes most what are termed freak accidents. And like I said, there are freak accidents. I know people riding along on the horse, there's a lot of freak accidents. Okay? But there's, you know, freak accidents is probably not 5% of all accidents, and the 95% of the other accidents are, for me, preventable. And they said, that article said there's 15,000 head injuries in the US each year from horse riding accidents. So, hang on. Let's just do the math here. So if we go, calculator, 15,000 divided by 100 times 95 equals, if I could save 14,250 people per year from having head injuries, I'd like to. Okay, I'm serious about this stuff. But let's say that's a high number. Okay, let's go. Say only 50% of riding accidents are preventable and the rest of them are freak accidents. Okay, how would you like to save 7,500 head injuries every year? I would love to, and that's what my goal with all this stuff is, educating people as into read the signs, okay? Learn how to read the signs. Don't ignore the signs. And one of the things you have to be able to do, that I think it's one of the personal development parts of training horses, is you have to learn how to be mindful, okay? You ever seen anybody with their earbuds in, brushing their horse, and he's brushing him and he's moving around and he's frag kicking, he's looking at the next door neighbours, and they go around this side because they're not mentally right here observing what's going on with this horse. They're thinking about, okay, when I get on, I'm going to do some upward and downward transitions, I'm going to do some 20-metre circles, and then when I'm finished, I'm probably going to put him away, but then I've got to get dressed and go to dinner, and okay? And so they're not reading these signs right here, and being able to read the signs is a skill that you acquire. During the conversation online about this recently, I had a lady, she's been to a number of my clinics in Australia, she's a dressage rider, and we're talking about being observant of that stuff, and she said something, I think it was, you would have to be, what did she say? You would have to be the most observant person I've ever seen, okay? So I hope my old boss here in America, when I first came to America 26 years ago, I hope my old boss is watching this, because he told me, you got to observe, you just don't see stuff, you just got to observe things. I mean, you know, he'd ask me questions like, if I went to town to get groceries on the way back, he goes, which side of the road were those new skid marks on? I'm like, what? And he goes, there's a new set of skid marks on the road between here and town. Kids have been out there doing burnouts. Which side of the road was on? I don't know. He's just really observant, and if you've ever seen the movie called Spy Game with Brad Pitt and Robert Redford, and at the very beginning of it, Robert Redford and Brad Pitt are sitting in a restaurant, okay? Brad Pitt's a beginner spy, and Robert Redford says, okay, what's the license plate on the third car from the door outside? Don't turn around. What colour shirt is the waiter wearing? The guy in the corner at the table. Is he reading a paper, or is he reading a book, or is he eating his dinner? And Brad Pitt's like, what? And Robert Redford said, these are the things you have to learn. You have to be observant. You have to see all that stuff, because if you don't see that stuff, it'll get you killed. This is exactly the same thing. And I know this is a long rant and a bit longer than my normal YouTube videos, but it's something I'm very, very passionate about. I would like to save 14,250 head injuries a year, but it takes a bit of work on everybody's part for that to happen. But anyway, so I hope that gives you something to think about. We'll see you guys next time.